Yeah, hi, I'm David Adam Richards, and I'm going to try to be less than 7 minutes. Look, it's already going. Jeez. Have to stare at that, I'll never get done. I wrote about 4 episodes that happened to New Brunswickers in the past. In each one of these episodes, New Brunswickers took a part. So I'm just going to read about them. Because I think our future's in good hands if we follow their lead. Cicero, Roman orator, compatriot of Caesar and Mark Antony, told us in one of his epistles that honor follows virtue like a shadow. A man or woman having virtue will someday have honor, that these two qualities can never be diametrically opposed. If it was true in Cicero's time, it is true in ours, and true as well in a far-off time as distant as ours to Cicero's is now. There are certain things that have been granted to us that will never change. I've met people in strange places, many who would never have read Cicero, who had this grace, this commitment to doing what was just, come what may. And I look upon them as the silent oracles that instruct us and instruct our country. In fact, it would be impossible to step into the future without them or their guidance. One was a Miramichi boy my age, born to a poverty few of us here could ever imagine, who went to work after he graduated from high school in order to save enough money so he and his brother, who was a year behind him, could enter university together. That might not be considered a big thing, but I challenge you all to say it was not a great thing. In 2005, I was honored to receive the Order of New Brunswick with many well-known and deserving fellow recipients. One of the recipients was a lady I had not known about until that afternoon. Her name was Margaret Labilios. She was not from a great city. She was from Eel River Bar. She wasn't born into comfort or privilege. As we well know, many of society's privileges had been denied her people, yet her life was a remarkable testament to the power of the human spirit. She was the first First Nation girl in New Brunswick to graduate from high school, the first to become a registered nurse. She served in the capacity of a nurse in the Second World War. She came back to her reserve and helped preserve her language by teaching it to children. She was the first woman ever elected chief in the province of New Brunswick. She adopted 11 native children who had no home. When I met her, she was wearing a traditional moose hide robe of so subtle and fine a texture, one might imagine it being silk. I've been fortunate to travel and to have met prime ministers and members of a cabinet. I have dined with Nobel Prize winners, yet it has been an honor, but none of it compared to the 15 minutes I was fortunate enough to have spoken to that lady. In November of 1951, 28 men of the 2nd Platoon of A Company of the 2nd Royal Canadian Regiment, having to hold a forward position against a battalion of 900 men of the Chinese army, were in a difficult position. The terrible fight lasted 2.5 days. At the end, there was hand-to-hand fighting, and the Canadians, now out of ammunition, were using their flare guns as weapons. The lieutenant radioed for the artillery to fire on his own position so he could try to retrieve the wounded. As dangerous and as brave a thing as could be done, the Chinese men finally withdrew. The Canadians lost 7 men. Of this great event in Canadian military history, of course, not a movie has been made. Please be not easily mistaken. I am not glorifying war. I am honoring the valor of ordinary men placed in a baleful position and saying that no matter what age or circumstance, courage does not lie and bravery will not fail. And without it, without courage, all other virtue and all other achievement is false. On the night of June 20th, 1959, the greatest fishing disaster in the history of Canada happened out on the Miramichi Bay. It has gone down in history as the Escumenac disaster. The small fishing boats left the wharf to drift all night for salmon, and many on board those boats were kids out for a night because the school year was ending. When the storm hit with waves 50 to 70 feet high, there was nothing to protect them. One man tied his son to the mast before he himself was swept overboard. When the Sharon Lloyd came upon another boat in trouble and finally got a lifeline across, the fisherman grabbing the line tied his dead friend to it first because the last thing he had promised was that he would never leave him. Then there was a 17-year-old Acadian Doucette boy. On his boat, the housing was gone, the boat was flooded, the engine dead. The prow rose and sank 10 feet with every wave. He was on board with his 14-year-old brother, his father, and his uncle. By the time a larger drifter was able to come alongside, the uncle had died. The father at the prow was unable to move. The only one who could act was this boy. The lifeline was thrown to him, and he immediately tied his 14-year-old brother to it. They managed to get his brother safely across. When the rescued drifter, pulled and tossed by the waves, finally got back into range and threw the line again, the youngster made it to the prow and tied his father to it, saying, "Dad, I'm the captain tonight." After they rescued his dad, it took another 40 minutes for Mr. Williston's drifter to get back to the Doucette's floundering, sinking boat and rescue the heroic boy. In the end, 35 men and boys died in a storm that, like so many storms in life, was unforeseen. Those who stayed to help, those who refused to leave, the injured and dying are calling to us across those desperate waves, not in fear and torment. No, my sons, not in fear and torment, but in love and joy. They are telling us to be steadfast in the future as they were in the past, and then our future will be secure. I began this talk by speaking of Cicero and the ancient age, the beauty that was Greece and the glory that was Rome, their fortune a myth like splendor of gold, chariots, and gods. But we are still a new country, and perhaps we are too young to have such myths. Perhaps for us, as in the stories I have just recounted, our myths have human blood. Our heroes are known to us by name. We can still greet them on the street, shake hands with them in a room, meet them on the stairs. That, I suppose, is the only message I can rightfully give. Thank you.